So we're on a Mercedes Club drive, doing the midweek drive up towards Peats Ridge at the moment. We've got an SLC behind us, and then we've got a modern A-Class, I think an AMG GT, a CLA, and a few other modern cars in front, and there is another SLC and an SEC somewhere or other. I'm in my 560 SEL. It was supposed to be quite a rainy day today, but it's actually quite nice. These midweek drives are really good because the road is pretty much free of traffic and you can sort of cruise along. I don't normally get a chance to go along to them. I bought this SEL in March of last year from the original owner. When I bought it, it had done 326,000 Ks. It's now done 331. He lived in Western Sydney and sort of drove it all around the sort of New South Wales country area where he had business interests. And it's a really great cruising car. There's plenty of power, and it's comfortable. It'll go along winding roads surprisingly well, like less body roll than you probably think. One of the things I've done to it is when I first bought the car, the self-leveling rear suspension had been removed, and the ride was just shocking. It was like driving an old ute. And so I sourced used self-leveling rear struts. They're no longer available from Mercedes, unfortunately, or Sachs, who used to make them for Mercedes, and it really transformed the car. It went from being an old ute to sort of how an S-Class should feel to drive, smooth, comfortable, and not sort of bumping all around the road like some cars do. So we're heading up towards Peats Ridge at the moment, and then we're going to, I think, turn around towards Wisemans Ferry, and then back Old Northern Road, around Cat Eye Ridge Road, I think, and then on to a lunch stop. Been out this way a few times now. It's quite a nice road. I think this one's Peats Ridge Road. It's quite a nice road just to cruise along in. This SEL, when it was brand new in 1987, it would have cost over 200,000 Australian dollars back then, which was the cost of more than one house, or a very nice one at least. These 126S classes were hugely expensive in sort of real terms. I mean, even a brand new one now is still only, I think a brand new S560 is something like 300,000 in today's money. So you can see how just how expensive they were back then, and probably you would have been better off buying a couple of houses given the depreciation. But back then Mercedes-Benz didn't have the same competition from Lexus, Audi, BMW that they do now, and they were able to charge a pretty steep price for these cars and get it, and you know, they sold pretty well here in Australia. Maybe less so the 560, but certainly the 300 and the 420 sold really well. You know, as did even the 560 SEC, which was another 20 or 30 grand more. And you know, for your money, you got a lot. I mean, you got I think the 126 was sort of car of the year when it was introduced in 81, and by the second generation they'd really sort of done a lot of subtle improvements to the car. And you know, the 560 was, at least here in Australia, the most powerful one you could get. There were more powerful 560s in other countries with better petrol and without some of the emissions laws that we had here in Australia in the 80s. This one being an 87, it doesn't have the airbag that I think the 89s and later have, which they also had the updated interior. It does have the Becker CD player, as most of the Australian delivery ones had as standard. I don't know when that came in. I think possibly some of the 86s didn't have it, but I'm really not quite sure about that. And for those of you watching from left-hand drive markets, one sort of, I guess, idiosyncrasy of the right-hand drive 126 is this trim piece here is not the same color as the interior. It's always black on a right-hand drive car, which I hadn't even noticed, even though I've owned a couple of left-hand drive models as well. So it looks like we're just making a quick stop here. Peats Ridge towards the Wisemans Ferry. This also takes us down towards the Hawkesbury River. This is also another quite nice winding road. It's actually a lot further than you think going down here, because it sort of follows all the winds of the river and so on, especially as you get close to the ferry. We just had to stop to let a couple of cars catch back up to the group. Looks like there was one of the other SLC, the 380 SEC, and there was, I think, an SLK, if I'm not mistaken. On this road, I did this drive before I put the suspension back in the car as it is supposed to be, and the car was bouncing all around the place. I mean, you can obviously put you know, there were 126s sold without the self-leveling, not here in Australia but in other markets, and they can, I think, drive nicely if the right springs and shock combination is put in, but typically what's put in is the springs are just way too stiff, and they just don't sort of suit the car. There is a whole table in the workshop manual of not just each model but also what options you have fitted to put the right spring and shock combination on the car, but most of the time when the cars have the self-leveling ripped out, they just put in some generic spring that's just not right at all, and so the cars just don't ride properly. You know, and to get the proper new Mercedes spring and all that is probably more expensive than just fixing the self-leveling, which is in my view a better system anyway. I mean, certainly Mercedes-Benz thought so. All of their performance cars of the era were always sold with the self-leveling. You know, obviously all the 560s. You have the 500e. I believe some of the 16-valve 201s, although I could be mistaken on those. But you know, they certainly saw that as a part of those performance cars, and even prior to that, they always seemed to have their most powerful motors with a a progressive suspension, like where you've got the 6.9 or even the 6.3 with the air suspension. So since I've owned this car about 9-10 months, I've had to do a few things to get it where I want it to be. Obviously the self-leveling suspension, and the timing chain was done at 300,000 Ks. I have the receipt for that, but the guides weren't done, and those guides do get brittle, so I had those changed. I didn't know about the camshaft oiler tube, so I had that done as well. The flex discs were a bit cracked, so they were replaced. What else? I changed the electric auxiliary fan and the viscous fan coupling, new thermostat, so the cooling system needed a few things done. And the exhaust was rubbing against the drive shaft, so I had a new stainless system put on that from the back looks identical to the factory one, but instead of those big kidney mufflers in the sort of under the fuel tank area, I've sort of got one smaller one in there, so it's not noisy, but at least you can tell it's a V8. The factory system is so quiet you'd hardly know. So I'm pretty happy with that. Oh, and I've also, the EAJ had a tiny leak. The EAJ is basically a part of the fuel injection system that can do sort of fine adjustments of the fuel delivery. That had a very small leak, so I replaced that. And the fuel injectors were I changed those too. And so hopefully that's probably all I need to do for a while. Oh yeah, and this steering wheel, I got a good used one. The stitching had all come apart around here. So did that, and then I've got a set of the footrests coming that these cars had as an option when they were new. I've been looking on eBay since I bought the car for a set that were in the right colour and not really silly money, and so I finally found some, and they're on their way. There are a couple of other minor things that I do need to do on the car. That passenger side mirror is stuck in its position, which is good for parking but not good for changing lanes. And the vacuum pods in the climate control system are not all as they need to be, so basically you get air coming out of the defrost when you don't want to, and they're a bit of a pain to change. You don't have to take the dash all the way out, but you've got to get quite into it to change those vacuum pods. And most 126s have climate control that's not really working as it should, because those vacuum pods are a pain to replace. And I believe at the moment of the different ones you have to buy, I think there's 5 of them, 2 of them are no longer available, and so you've sort of got to try and adapt different ones, like you get the one from the other side and you change the arm and all this sort of nonsense. I've heard they might be coming back, but given the number of parts for the sort of this era of Mercedes-Benz that are going no longer available, it's I guess I'll believe it when I see it. We're starting on a bit more of a windy section now as we head down towards the river. This is some of these better driving roads on this route, and as we're doing it midweek, there's almost no traffic, which is great. About some of these roads too is they're just a bit further out from the city, so you don't get so many cyclists that are sort of hard to get around because there's not enough space to see around them on some of these tighter corners. That some of the roads closer to Sydney you get a lot, especially on Saturday and Sunday. The Royal National Park is a good example of that. One thing I've noticed on this car is I believe the previous owner has put brake pads on it that those ones that don't make brake dust, because the wheels stay pretty clean on this car. But when you compare it to the genuine pads, or at least the OEM pads, they just don't feel as good. There's more pedal effort required, and so I think there is a real trade-off. You know, like, yes, the wheels might stay cleaner, but the feel of the OEM pads is just a whole lot better. You know, once they're not that bad, but once these pads wear out, I'm not going to be putting pads like that back on. I'll go back to the factory ones. I think the dust is just a price you pay for the good brakes for the time that these cars have. Second series 126 had bigger rotors and calipers and so on than the first generation, which was it's one of the improvements that is quite nice to have on the second series. Not all of them are that important, but you do notice that, especially in the SEL like this one. Is a big heavy car. I mean, I think it's something like 1,800 kilos, so certainly notice it. So now we're down towards some of the tributaries of the Hawkesbury, I think, and when it's sort of high tide, you know, the water gets quite close to the road along here in places. So it's going to be interesting to see if it works. It's sort of mounted to a pair of glasses, which I thought might be easier to have, well, you know, so you can still use both hands while driving, and you know, you can also sort of see the same perspective as the driver versus like a standard sort of dash cam. So yeah, we'll see. The 126 is quite a popular model in our Mercedes club. There's you know, at events there's normally at least a couple of them, and you know, generally in pretty nice condition too. Surprisingly, given by far the most popular 126, or common I should probably say, 126 sold in Australia was the 280 SC. You don't see many of those. Most of them tend to be 420 SELs or various SECs and so on, but they are common and they've survived quite well. You used to see a lot more 123s, but I'm told a lot of them were bought up when they were not worth anything much and shipped overseas for spares, you know, Middle East and other countries like that. So, you know, 10-15 years ago you'd see 123s everywhere. I mean, I've had a couple. certainly still around, and there's some nice ones in the club, but given the 126 was quite expensive when new, it's survived really well, and it has quite a following. The other older model that has a big following in our club is the 107, particularly the SL, but there's a decent number of SLCs out there too, which is pretty good given how those cars have such a propensity to rust, and you know, they went through a period when they weren't worth a whole lot of money. You know, I've had mine since 2003, and you know, I know sort of about halfway through the time I owned it, you know, they were almost couldn't give them away, but they've had a bit of a resurgence of late, and you know, it's good to see two of them on this drive. The other thing about the 126 is they really do the miles well. You know, that there's plenty of cars that have done big mileages that you'll see at club events, and you know, they're cars that look like, you know, they're only a couple of years old from a condition point of view. I mean, this one's in pretty good shape, and it's done 330. There was another one at a recent event I saw which had done 450. I think it was a 420, and that car was immaculate. You know, so I think it's a real testament to how well these cars were built. How obviously, as long as they're maintained properly, and you know, this car was, and I'm sure those other ones were too, how well they hold up, and you know, also the interiors. I mean, this interior is in great shape. Yeah, there's a little bit of cracking on the dash, which is very common for cars here in Australia. There's even a car that's garaged like this one, the hot sun will eventually crack the dash, but you know, everything else is in really nice shape. Probably the other thing that saved these cars was the fact that they were so expensive. I imagine they were bought by, you know, older people who, you know, didn't have young children climbing all over them, and this sort of thing that sort of spared them a bit. You know, I know our family car takes a bit of a beating from our young children, and you know, it's not that, it's just sort of a fact of life, really. So we're here at Wisemans Ferry, one of the 5 ferries in the Greater Sydney area, 1 on the main harbour and 4 on the Hawkesbury or its tributaries. We're now behind the CLA45S, which is, I think it's got the record for the most amount of power per litre. I mean, it's, I think, a 2-litre engine with certainly a lot more power than there's the V8 in this car. Now, I've never been behind these trucks on the ferry before, so I don't know if due to weight they can just fill it up, or they'll need to let the trucks go first. We'll have to see. They're not full though.
Waiting for pairing.
So we're on the ferry. It looks like they're using the smaller one today. I think there's a bigger one they sometimes use, probably during the week. I think that SLC's been lowered, so it's struggling to get on a little bit. Looks like we're missing one of the cars from our group. So all these ferries are free of charge in Sydney to go over. We're off the ferry now. You see there's a fair line of people waiting. I'm surprised they don't have the other one going as well. Considering how stormy it was. Unfortunate. Going where we're going. Wouldn't want to get too close to him on a hill start. Oh. Yeah, I think he must need to take a bit of a run up. Lucky he didn't hit one of our cars. That smoke, I wonder if that's... Oh, he's not making it. Yeah, get your car away there, Vince, you're not gonna... him. Oh, we're still stuck behind one. Well, we've lost our trucks and we can now cruise along Wisemans Ferry Road. We're heading out towards Windsor, which is where our lunch spot will be. It's still behind the CLA 45S, which I did check. There is a record for the most powerful production car 2-litre turbo engine. It's about 500 newton meters of torque, as well as like high 300 kilowatts of power. It's quite a impressive feat of engineering, that motor. This area around Maruta and so on is quite a nice area to drive around in, and I suppose that over time it's just going to become more and more built up, which will be a shame, but I quite like coming out to drive on some of these roads, whether it's in a club event or just to bring one of the cars up here. Sackville Ferry, that's another one of the ferries on the Hawkesbury. around here there's lots of acreage, and I think, you know, people who have horses and small scale farming and this sort of thing. This is one of the routes we did on a night drive a couple of months back. It's a bit nicer during the day, you can see a bit more obviously, but there's even less traffic at night along here.